Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. Thank you for attending today and talking with me about the natural history of the Channel Islands. Just a quick note about me and who I am. I am a Santa Barbara County native. I grew up in Lompoc. I oddly studied art and then geography and then ecology. I don't recommend going backwards like that. I worked for 8 years on Catalina Island, which is where I got my island legs. And then I moved back to Santa Barbara County to get a PhD from UCSB in ecology, evolution, and marine biology. Then before finishing that, I joined the garden in 2012 and islands and worked on all 8 islands at this point. So that's me, but in the spirit of knowing you best I can in this Zoom format, I'd like to take a little poll of you all and see how many islands have all of you been to? So Caitlin, start a poll.
All right. Yeah, I've just started that poll. Okay, we have almost everyone voted, so I'm going to end the polling and share our results.
Okay, this is good to know. So most of you have been to 1 or 2 islands. 13% of you have been to 7 or 8, so that's great. So I figured we'd have a wide range. I know there's a couple in the audience who know a lot about the islands. I'm gonna just, hopefully there'll be something for everybody here. All right, so we're gonna play Name That Island, and you'll have to do this in your head as I put the arrow. And you already saw it. This is Anacapa. This is one of the smaller, closer islands. This one here is Santa Cruz. This one here is Santa Rosa. This one here is San Miguel. This one here is Santa Barbara. This one here is Catalina. This one here is San Nicolas. And lastly, this one here is San Clemente. So I just want to acknowledge that these are their original names. There were people living there long before us, and they gave their own names to the islands. For instance, Anacapa's name means mirage, which is really appropriate, just given that it's these 3 islets that can look kind of mysterious. Today, the island owners are as follows. We have Santa Cruz Island, which is owned about 3/4 by the Nature Conservancy and 1/4 by the Park Service. And then the Park Service basically manages 5 different islands: San Miguel, Santa Rosa, Anacapa, and Santa Barbara as well. And then you'll see these Navy logos pop up. So San Nicolas and San Clemente are both owned and managed by the Navy, whereas San Miguel is actually owned by the Navy, but it's managed by the Park Service. And then lastly, Santa Catalina is owned mostly by a nonprofit that was formed just for this purpose, to conserve a large part of Catalina Island. So I've got different sections to this. I'm going to go give a sneak peek for all 8 islands, but first I want to just give an overview of some of the things that make the islands so cool. First of all, there's lots of plants and animals that are endemic to 1 or more of the islands, and I'm going to be using this word a lot. Endemic basically means it's found there and nowhere else. So basically their hotspots of biodiversity. They've been called the North American Galapagos. They've got just as great of stories, lots of cool evolutionary things going on. We've got neat organisms like the Channel Islands fox. Can you see my arrow, Caitlin? I'm
Yes,
seeing,
I can see your
okay,
cursor.
cool. So you've got the Channel Islands fox, you've got felt leaf ceanothus, you've got a variety of different live forevers in the genus Dudleya. You've got lots of different buckwheats. You've got a really cool island spotted skunk. There's a different subspecies of mouse on each of the different islands. So lots of cool stuff going on. This is the island fox, which has a different subspecies on each of the 6 islands. And you can see they're named in large part for those islands. And they're about as cute as they come. Also lots of beautiful and cute plants as well. Over 100 plant species not found on the mainland. We've got things like lotus and an island scrub oak that's only found on the islands. We've got big, beautiful buckwheat, lots of different manzanitas, live forevers in the genus Dudleya, and astragalus or loco weed. We also have dwarves and giants. So for instance, pygmy mammoths, as the name implies, are smaller than usual. They evolved from the Columbian mammoth, but these mammoths are only about 6.5 feet tall at the shoulder. So they evolved on the northern Channel Islands, and they were there from about 150,000 years ago until about 10 to 12,000 years ago. We even, on the islands, had a giant deer mouse, which is now extinct because it's extinct and has been for a while. I don't have a picture of it. This is not a giant deer mouse. But you can see the bones on the right, and that these are the bones of the giant deer mouse versus today's deer mouse. They were 30 to 35% larger than today's deer mouse, and they're kind of mysterious as to why they disappeared. It could be that humans introduced the new deer mouse, but we're just not sure. And when I'm citing a lot of different things here, you'll see that I put the papers on the slides. Feel free to email me, ask me for any of these papers, and apologies in advance if there's anyone I'm not citing or forgetting accidentally. It's not intentional. But so we have a pygmy mammoth and we have a giant mouse, and I love this cartoon that Peter Schuyler generously gave me of these two facing off. The islands are also an important haven for seabirds, things like the California brown pelican that basically nests in, the only breeding colonies in the United States are on Anacapa Island and Santa Barbara Island. You also have the Scripps murrelet, formerly known as the Xanthus murrelet, the largest colonies of them in the world. We have just really abundant marine life that thrives in the kelp forests and the intertidal zones, especially within marine protected areas where we don't fish. There's just a lot of really nutrient-rich cold water coming up from the subsurface and from the depths, and really fueling just abundant marine life all the way up to a variety of different whales that come through the channel. The Chumash and the Tonga, the native tribes, had some of the most complex early cultures found worldwide. These photos from John Johnson show, the evolution of technology from, on the left here, the mano and matate, the more primitive grinding stones where folks would grind things sort of more horizontally, and then evolving to the mortar and pestle, where it's more vertical crushing. We have a harpoon here. Economic exchange with shell beads and trading, also advanced socio-political organizations. So we had tribes with tribal leaders, we had rock art, we had ritual, whole societies. And Santa Rosa Island is home to the oldest dated human remains in North America, about 13,000 years before the present. I put a little asterisk there. In the news not that long ago, there was a finding in San Diego area dated, claimed to be about 50,000 years old, but that's highly contested. So I'm sticking with the 13,000 years before present. And Archaeological resources are really well preserved on the islands, especially because of the lack of burrowing mammals. And so they're not churning up the different levels, which means we can really keep those levels separate and study what happened when. The islands also have a really cool modern human history. Here's the Channel Islands National Park timeline. Obviously you can't read that, but it just goes through all of the different eras, which I'll take you through for each of the islands, just a little slice. I've highlighted here for Anacapa Island, Frenchy Ledreau, who lived out there for about 28 years and sounds like quite a character. I think I would have liked to have him as an uncle. Sounds like he was a big storyteller and a singer and a lot of fun. So he lived out there on Anacapa for a long time, and he ended up being the caretaker of the island for the Park Service. But he was a rum runner and just basically an island hermit.
Denise, I just want to let you know we have a little bit of lag on your slides, so they're not changing right when you click them. Okay. Maybe could you try turning off your video to see if that helps with it?
I can try. Each of my screens have a different thing going on. Okay.
Yep, there you go. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to dispel any notion that the islands are pristine. They're not. Lots of ranching and feral animals have really altered the landscape on these islands, and they're in a state of recovery. But fear not, there are major conservation actions that are being taken on the islands. Things you'll hear about like feral animal removal, recovery of the island fox that really declined on many of the islands drastically. Feral cat eradication on San Nicolas Island. These are really big, really complicated, difficult projects. And in the stories that I'm going to tell you, humans are both the bad guys and the good guys. We're the ones who dumped DDT in the channel, but we're also the ones who have nursed the bald eagles back to the islands, thanks to groups like the Institute for Wildlife Studies. So in my eyes, this is the era of conservation, and there's a lot of cause for optimism. So that's a slice of what I'm going to be doing for each of the islands. We'll go about 10 minutes, hopefully, for each of the islands. So we'll take a break in the middle, and here we go. Here's an introduction to all 8 islands, smallest to biggest. I'll tell you, it was very, very hard to choose which little slices to tell you about. I could talk about this for days, and I do. I have a class that goes 9 or 10 weeks with an hour and a half for each of the islands. So let's start with Santa Barbara Island, and what I'd like to do, if I could, is ask you, for those who have been to Santa Barbara Island, type into the chat real quick, what are some words that come to mind right away for that island. And Caitlin, I just want you to know that I don't seem to have access to the chat, so I'll need you to read off a couple as soon as you can. We don't have a long time.
Okay, so we have rugged, barren. Those are the only 2 so far.
I like those.
Nice cove, birds and pinnipeds. Isolated.
Those are all really great and really appropriate. Here's the name that I give it. So lots of, and I've tried my hand at it too. I think you'll come to see why I call this one the little island that could. First of all, it is the smallest island. It's only 1 square mile. It's volcanic, and it's just got some real shallow peaks. 635 feet is the highest one. You can see in the picture here that it has real steep cliffs on the side. So those cliffs are really important to seabirds. And it's a haven for seabirds, like I mentioned, especially the two small islands that are both volcanic. Santa Barbara and Anacapa are especially. And it includes things like this sweet little guy, the Scripps murrelet, likes steep rocky cliffs. They're inaccessible to predators, and they like to nest in rock crevice under vegetation. These little guys, only 1 or 2 days after hatching, the young are led from the nest by their parents, who then fly away, and the young have to make their way to the ocean, sometimes dropping down 200 feet to the ocean. So that puts it in perspective, a rough childhood. Okay, can y'all see this slide? This one has a video, so it takes a little time to load.
I'm still on the Scripps mural. Okay, now it has changed for me to the song sparrow.
Okay, so there is unique to Santa Barbara Island. Several of the other islands have song sparrows that are unique as well. It has a special and persistent song, and this is a song sparrow in general, not has a still and persistent song. And I can't think of much sweeter sound. Again, it's got this special song only on Santa Island, and something that's really interesting. The heat of the different size bills, and so when it's a hotter island, they have bigger size bills. That actually is where they dissipate the heat, and that was turning to a couple of plants. We have some island giants, as the name implies here. So this is a giant buckwheat, and if you're familiar with buckwheats on the mainland, you'll probably tell right away that these are much bigger than the mainland buckwheats. Thus the name. There's actually 3 different varieties, one found only on Catalina, one found only on Clemente, and one found only on Santa Barbara. And you can see why it's variety compactum. It's more compact, the inflorescences are down low, not as open as the one on Catalina Island that's called St. Catherine's Lace. So turning to some human history, Alvin and Annie Hyder moved to Santa Barbara Island in 1916 with their 2 kids. They shared this little 2-bedroom shack with Alvin's brother, and what I want to point to is that they actually had to anchor this house with cables to keep the thing blowing. People who lived out there really had to adapt to those conditions. In order to get the supplies from the water from their boats up to the top of the island on those steep cliffs, they had to devise a wooden sled and track for hauling supplies, which is just kind of crazy. They had big, heavy, strong horses to work these sled lines. And that's a main reason why I gave the island the name, the little island that could. Next. And water was really hard to come by. You saw the aerial of this island. It's small, it's dry, it doesn't have any big drainages with permanent water. Keep clicking. They had to put in some reservoirs across the island, and those would get fouled by birds again. And they also had to bring it in from the mainland in 50-gallon drums, which is just crazy, the work they had to put in to make it work on this island. Next. They also did crazy amounts of farming for this tiny island, potatoes and barley hay. Click. And they had some heartbreaking failures too. Next. They raised sheep, goats, pigs, geese, turkeys, and chicken all on this little island, and you can see them loading up gear on their sled. Next. But before leaving the island in 1922, they left a parting gift. They introduced Belgian hares around 1918. Y'all know something about rabbits and how quickly they reproduce, and they eat a lot of greenery, so that was a bad thing for the islands. Click again. But maybe not as bad as the feral cats that had been introduced at the end of the 1800s, who are just real known problems for islands. They've caused a lot of things to go extinct, especially birds and small mammals, and they're voracious predators that eat even when they're full. Next. The US government took over and started with early aircraft early warning station around World War II. Pretty much all the islands were involved in these early warning stations. Next. That led to a photo tracking station. Next. And then National Park was added to in 1980. Next. But by then there was lots and lots of bare ground and lots of erosion. Next. And lots of disturbance tolerant non-native plants like ice plant and malva. Next. Today's vegetation and malva next, and if you click again, is dominated by in the light and dark green non-native grassland. If you click again, you'll see in the mauve, there's lots of invasive crystalline ice plants. And then if you click again, you'll see that, so those colors are a lot of the island. The light blue shows a native dominated area of sea blight. And then next, there is a nice area with native boxthorn and cactus, which is great for supporting the native wildlife. Next. So this is crystalline ice plant. You can see why it's called that. It's a particularly nasty invader because it makes the soil really salty, which pushes out all of the other native plants. And it's native plants that really are the foundation for the web of life. So when you push out the native plants, they're not supporting all the different insects and all the other higher trophic levels that eat those insects like lizards and birds. Next. So not surprisingly, the Santa Barbara Island song sparrow went extinct, I'm afraid. Next. And seabirds have had a real hard time of it. The Scripps murrelet, for instance, the nesting drastically decreased. Cats and auklets were extirpated from the cats, from light pollution, toxic pollution, habitat destruction, and low prey availability. Next. Here's the good news. And Caitlin, I don't know why we can't see the bottom of that, but if you can brainstorm how to deal with that, that'd be good. So habitat restoration started for seabirds a number of years back. You can see it was a big collaborative effort, lots of different institutions working on it. And as it turns out, restoring seabirds comes down to restoring habitat, which is not surprising. So habitat for nesting and also habitat to hide in as protection from predators. So you can see in these different color blocks, they started the restoration. It was tough going because the water situation, they had to bring out water, find different ways to do that. They had to establish a nursery, but they've made some great gains and a lot of lessons learned to apply this throughout the island. Next. Hey, yay, nice. Next.
Sorry, let me get back to it. I'm glad that worked. Okay.
In 2014, the first murrelet egg was found in one of the restoration areas, Landing Cove. So it works. Next. So we wanted to have some time for a few questions where with all the technical difficulties, let's just take maybe one. And if you could just put your name in the chat, then whoever has a question, Caitlin can call on you and unmute you.
And for whatever reason, now that I'm sharing my screen, I cannot see the chat. So Randy is going
but
to.
Now I can, so that's good.
Yeah.
I couldn't before. Okay, let's see. So
why don't we just have people type their questions?
Sure. It's like there's a lot of people wondering about the Xanthus murrelet and the Scripps murrelet. They used to be the Xanthus murrelet. Can you tour these islands by boat? Some of them, so the Navy Islands, you don't want to get too close because that's, they won't like that and they won't let you do that. But yeah, you can boat right up to Anacapa or Santa Cruz, the Park Service owned islands for sure. Okay, that's the only one I see, so we'll move on. Oh, can I reiterate which native plants are found on the island? So I wish I could introduce you to all the different native plants found on the island. I did talk about the buckwheat, which is one of the plants that's unique to that island. I'm afraid I can't go down the list, but I think you'll get introduced to a lot of the different plants as we go through the different islands. And there is some floras available. And the garden is actually working on an all 8 flora right now. So you'll be able to answer that question really well. And as far as Tom asked about accessibility during COVID, the charter boats stopped for a while when COVID happened. They're running again, the Island Packers boats, but I believe at like half capacity. And then I think the campgrounds are still shut down. All right, Caitlin, you want to move on?
Sure, and I found the chat box, so I can also read those if you'd like me to. Just let me know.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so Anacapa, let's take just 20 seconds. What are the first words that come to mind? Put them in the chat when you hear Anacapa. Ooh, nesting birds, spooky, those are good. Noisy gulls, foghorn, those are all great. Seagulls, giant coreopsis. Awesome. Those are all really great answers. I chose one of them to name Anacapa next. And that is the Lookout Island because of the prevalence of this lighthouse and the story that's behind it. Next. So this one is just a tiny bit bigger than Santa Barbara Island, only 1.1 square miles. It's the closest to the mainland though, which means it's an easier target for plants and animals to get out there. That's important when thinking about the diversity on these different islands. The maximum elevation is 930 feet. So for a real small island, it's actually got some nice diversity. Next. So this is the California brown pelican I mentioned before as one of the important seabirds on the islands. It's really important to the brown pelican, especially to have islands without predators, including humans. And another reason why Santa Barbara and Anacapa are great for seabirds is because they don't have the island fox, which is a predator. These guys, their pouch can hold up to 3 gallons of water and fish. They're pretty cool. Next. There are actually 8 island endemic dandelions found on the different islands. 5 of them shown here are found on Anacapa Island. One of them was named for Steve Junak, who was at the garden for 37 years, doing a lot of exploration on the islands. What's cool about these is that these are known neo-endemics, which means for a long time, people thought that the islands had mostly species that were paleo-endemic. So they evolved a long time ago. versus evolving once they got out to the island. So these are neo-endemics. They got out to the island and then they diversify, which is interesting new information. Next. I mentioned that each island has a unique deer mouse. This one is the Anacapa Island deer mouse. I like to mention what they eat because it's important to think about the whole food web and when these things are struggling, what it takes to get them back. So they eat seeds and they eat bugs. So that means they need that diversity of native plants. Next. Also, what's cool about Anacapa, because it's 3 separate islets, they've actually found that there's that the mice can get between the different islands and there's genetic exchange. So on Anacapa, the lighthouse was built because of the thick fog and the strong currents were really treacherous for vessels. So there were a lot of shipwrecks. Next. Between 1850 and 1900, at least 33 ships were wrecked in the channel. Next. And as we had the gold rush and more activity and lots of people and packages being delivered, there were just more and more of these. So kind of one of the worst was the SS Winfield Scott, which wrecked off of Anacapa in 1853, carrying 300 passengers and $1 million in gold. Next. And I just want to point out that these are cultural resources that are protected by the Park Service. This is one of over 100 protected shipwrecks in the park. Next. So finally, by 1854, they had enough, and they reserved the island for lighthouse purposes. They started with a more cheesy one, and then they quickly discovered, you can move on, Caitlin, that they needed a better one. So there was a tank steamer incident in 1921 that led them to build and open this fancy lighthouse in 1932. It's got this really cool Fresnel lens that you can go in and see. It was the last lighthouse built on the west coast of the US. Next. And this is just a little joke I wanted to just show. It doesn't it look like C-3PO is a lot like that lens. So to maintain and work this lighthouse, they had a crew of 15 to 25 people all year maintaining this lighthouse. Next. And you can see the steep-sided cliffs here, just like on Santa Barbara Island. This is a volcanic island, steep cliffs. So getting materials up to the top of the island is challenging. And when you visit, you have to climb a whole fleet of stairs. So a landing dock and a hoisting crane were added first to get all the materials up for the lighthouse and all of the associated buildings. Next. They had to build a catchment basin and storage tanks for water. Next. And then when they found that the water tanks were an easy target for angry boaters, they had to build this building, which they call the church, to protect the water supply. Next. So then by 1939, the lighthouse service was replaced by the US Coast Guard. And again, just like with Santa Barbara Island, a coastal lookout station was established, which was then automated. Next. This was a cool find from National Geographic from Anacapa. A blanket of ice plant helps keep down the dust. So we can see why people introduce ice plant. It's often to stabilize the soil, and unfortunately it does it too well. There are different ice plants. The predominant one on Anacapa is a different one that I talked about, but they all are pretty bad. Next. Then in 1957, it became part of Channel Islands National Monument. Next. And then they started dealing with the natural resources. For instance, that shipwreck of the Winfield Scott brought black rats. Rats are really scary. They're even scarier than cats, I would say. They're omnivores, they're adaptable, they're opportunistic. They're the main cause of extinction for not only small mammals, but reptiles, amphibians, insects, intertidal species, and birds. They'll eat the eggs and even sometimes the young. Next. And through their impacts to birds, they can change the whole ecosystem. Next. So you see circled there, you have gulls and oyster catchers, and they eat invertebrates in the intertidal. So what happens is when you take those birds away, next, you have an explosion of things like barnacles and predatory snails. Next. And then what happens is that releases the territory from the algae, because they're eating all the algae, and then that opens up space for different things like anemones. So they have, through that one impact on the birds, they're having this enormous impact on the whole ecosystem. Next. So in the early 2000s, the park set out to do some black rat eradication. This was a collaborative effort. And it was the first ever invasive rodent eradication from an entire island where an endemic rodent was present. It was also the first use of rodenticide in an eradication in the US. Next. So there are several challenges on Anacapa to doing this. One is just the steep, rugged nature of the islands, islets. Also things like these nesting seabirds that needed to be protected from this anticoagulant rodenticide. Next. And then there were animals that needed to be protected, like the rufous crowned sparrow and these little deer mice. Next. And beyond that, you had a lot of public opposition. So there were a lot of angry people. There were groups like Friends of the Rats that were formed to keep this from happening. But the park took a lot of, they stood strong and they kept going. And they took a lot of actions to protect all these different animals by bringing them in for captive breeding and designing the rodenticide to be less attractive to the native creatures. Next. And they, like I said, they brought them in for to captivity, and then they released them. And after the rats were controlled, you can see the lines there for the bait drops. The deer mouse populations rebounded really quickly. So you have the different islets that they did at different times to always keep some that weren't being treated at one time. And you see just how quickly those deer mouse populations rebounded. Next. And then after 6 months, peregrine falcons were breeding again, and the anticoagulant concentration in the bait pellets declined by over 90%. So basically within 6 months, the toxicants were gone. Next. And it also led to the goal of seabird recovery, like the Scripps murrelet and the Cassin's auklet. Within just a number of 3-4 years, hatching success increased from 42% to 80% for the Scripps murrelet, and nest predation was way down. Cassin's auklet began nesting 4 months after their removal, and when they had not been documented before on Anacapa. Next. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions about Anacapa or anything, I guess. Thanks, Chuck, for the info on island packers. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to move on. Caitlin, if you want to push forward. Now we have San Miguel Island. Let's see, so no snakes on island for rats. So some of the bigger islands have snakes, but none on these small islands yet. San Miguel Island, let's do the chat with words that come to mind for San Miguel real quick.
Are you seeing those, Denise? The description?
Let's see, I see windy. Yes, windy, windy.
We
Visibility.
got some sound interference, I think.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Did you turn something on by chance?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. I did something, but I did it back. So limited mobility, Cabrillo Monument, windy, pinnipeds. Those are all great answers. So if you click again, Caitlin, I call it the wild island. And it has a lot to do with that wind and the fog. As Johnson said in 1980, one of the windiest, foggiest, most maritime and wave-pounded areas on the west coast of North America. So it's really out there in the channel. It's one of the northernmost island. It's very exposed, and it does feel wild, which is cool. Next. So this is primarily a sandy, kind of windswept plateau, highest elevation only 830 feet, but we're moving up in size. We're going from smallest to largest, I think would be obvious. 10,000 acres. The wind can be 100 miles per hour. Heavy fog is common. And this was the first place I experienced both at the same time, both heavy fog and wind. It was really weird. Next. I'm from Lompoc, where we have lots of fog and lots of wind, but not generally at the same time. So island foxes. Now we're getting to the bigger islands. The 6 largest islands each have their own subspecies of island fox. And this is another example, like the pygmy mammoth, of island dwarfism. It's sort of weird to think this is the apex predator for the islands. And so, you know, nothing really eats it until things get out of whack, which is another story. Next. They're omnivores. They eat just about everything. They eat plants. They eat the fruits of manzanita. They eat the tunas of Prickly cactus. They eat insects like Jerusalem crickets. And it's not hard to understand why their densest populations are in woodland and chaparral for that reason. Now, I want you to remember that they really like woodland and chaparral as we get further in this story. Next. Here's a charismatic mega flora. This is the rare and beautiful island mallow. So it has 2 different subspecies, which currently aren't recognized due to kind of a taxonomic accident, but we still recognize them in our hearts, the northern island mallow and the southern island mallow. And you can see through those gray images on the left, those are scanning electron microscope images. And you can see why the northern one appears more gray. It's got those kind of stellate hairs on the leaves. Next. So our botanists at the garden have been working to redescribe these different subspecies, and in doing genetic analysis, they actually found that the Catalina one and the Clemente one appear to be different. And so they're working to confirm that and publish those results. Next. Another really cool thing about San Miguel Island is Point Bennett and all the pinnipeds. Someone mentioned all the pinnipeds. Up to 6 different species. They can have 30,000 individuals, if you can even imagine that. 6 different species, including sea lions and harbor seals and stellar sea lions and northern fur seals and Guadalupe fur seals and elephant seals. Next. I'll focus on just one here for a minute, the northern fur seal, and you can see that the species name is Ursinus, which is referring to bears. And so they have this really thick, warm coat. And that's because they live in really cold places like Russia and the Bering Sea and the Farallon Islands. So this is their southernmost distribution. Next. Another cool thing about San Miguel is some of the earliest evidence of island occupation. This is Daisy Cave. In the northeastern part of the island. Early deposits dated to 11,500 years ago. Next. And this cave is pretty extensive inside, about 11 meters deep, 1.5 to 3 meters wide, divided into 3 chambers. The first and the last chamber you can actually stand up inside. Next. So this is one of the oldest known shell middens in North America. It was occupied briefly around that time. Lots of remains of quick tools and rocky shore shellfish, and I'll just walk you through some of those. So Caitlin, if you want to just kind of click in succession, we got the red abalone, the black turban, the California mussel, the giant chiton, and crabs. All of these kinds of rocky creatures that they took advantage of. Next. So as John Erlandson says, he's one of the important archaeologists on the island. Paleo-Indians had a diversified maritime economy. They also ate birds, they ate pinnipeds, they ate fish, and they had all kinds of different barbed points and crescents, all these different kind of projectile points that have been found on the islands. You can see in the map image there that this site that they sampled in this paper, actually at one time the islands were larger because sea level was lower, and so this site was more inland than now. Next. So unfortunately for all those pinnipeds, the maritime fur trade really decimated marine mammals. They had commercial otter and seal hunting. It was led first by Russians and then Americans and the British. They took advantage of native Alaskan peoples, and they came down and stayed for periods of time on the islands and collected furs to trade for goods in China, like porcelain and silk. Next. And one by one, the victims of the maritime fur trade included the otters, which went nearly extinct by the 1800s. Next. Fur seals were slaughtered by the thousands. Next. Then a market for sea lion developed. They used the whiskers, they used the skin for leather, they used the meat for dog food. Beginning in the 1880s, whalers turned to hunting the northern elephant seal, which went nearly extinct by 1910. Next. And then we had more permanent residents, modern residents. 1863, George Nidever paid $1,800 to rent about half of San Miguel Island and its livestock. And I don't know if you can see, there's some arrows pointing. There's a little footbridge, if you can picture where that is on San Miguel Island, and just the remains of his adobe house are there. Very little left at this point above Kyler Harbor. So George Nidever was a frontiersman, he was a trapper, and he came from Tennessee, one of the first to cross the Sierra Nevada, and he came to make his way in California and did a lot of work on the islands. Next. But he overstocked the island. This is a sandy lump, not a lot of moisture. He had livestock carrying about 2 times the load that the flora could sustain, and the animals just ate what they had to. They tore out plants to the roots. So what was once described as lush vegetation was, then just devoid of any trees and shrubs. Next. When he sold the lease to H.W. Mills, he relates he heard the island is almost covered in sand. Next. But that didn't stop the ranching. It actually intensified, and each of the new owners, they moved the houses as the old ones got covered in sand. There's a book called San Miguel by T.C. Boyle that's an interesting read. Captain Waters brought his wife Minnie over, but she had tuberculosis, and it was actually the very worst place she could be with all the wind and fog. And she didn't last very long, about 6 months before they had to move back to the mainland. Next. So ranching and farming, with all the erosion that happened, actually changed the coastline. So keep an eye on Cardwell Point as you go from 1871 to 1893, 1910. Okay, maybe a little different. Next. And then you look at the next images from aerials, and you can see a sand spit forming there at the tip. So all that sand sweeping across the island with the wind and the erosion, forming this weird sand spit. Next. So San Miguel, as I mentioned, is owned by the military. First, it was a radio communications outpost and then a coastal lookout station like the others. Then for a while, it was actually a bombing target before it became, next, part of Channel Islands National Park in 1980. Next. So one still has to be aware of unexploded ordnance and go through, either be accompanied by someone or go through training if you're working out on the island. So all that erosion, we lost some things. The vegetation today is grassland and coastal scrub. And here's just some images to show you what it looks like. Next. But most agree that there used to be more woody vegetation. And in fact, you can find periodic burls like this, which is like the underground storage organ with just a little bit of branch left from old woody shrubs that used to be on the island. Next. And this is caliche forest, which is really bizarre when you realize what it is. It's basically the roots of trees from several hundred years ago. So basically this calcium carbonate would form from dissolved marine shells, and it would seep down into the roots either when the roots would decompose and the sand would fill in, and that would preferentially form these casts, or it would just form around the roots themselves. But then the crazy part is that so much soil was lost due to erosion that this is like the roots turned inside out. You're seeing what should be underground. Next. And because of all this, at least 4 land birds that nested prehistorically disappeared in modern times. This is a recent paper by Paul Collins at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. Next. And these two likely due to the lost woodland and chaparral habitat that we don't really have too much evidence for anymore, but we pretty much know existed. Next. And here's where I just want you to remember that little island fox that especially likes the woodland and chaparral and has periods of really struggling on the islands. Next. So let's turn back to those pinnipeds that are so glorious on the islands. They have been monitored since 1969, and I mentioned all the decimation of them. But 2 heroes, Bob DeLong and Sharon Mellon, working for NOAA Marine Mammal Lab, have been monitoring those pinnipeds, and there's been some good news. Next. For instance, the northern fur seals recolonized San Miguel in the 1960s, thanks in large part to the 1911 Fur Seal Treaty and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and their population is now about 10,000. So it's proof that these environmental protection laws really work. So I hope that you will all support those laws. Next. And the NOAA team actually helped protect that beautiful malva too. So sometimes the pinnipeds can do their own damage, and they moved some of the malva plants up the slope to make sure that they didn't go extinct. So this is actually, this northern island mallow is one of the most endangered plants on the Channel Islands. Next. So good news for this rare plant is that some restoration work is starting soon. It's going to involve building a nursery on San Miguel Island, surveying, tagging all the individuals, analyzing the genetics, growing new plants, planting them out, and also seed banking as an insurance policy at the garden, and representing the different genetic stock in our living collection at the garden as well. Next. Okay, maybe 1 or 2 questions if you have them. We're a bit behind because of the technology. Okay, I'm not seeing questions, so I'm going to move on unless something pops up, and then I'll answer it. So Caitlin, if you want to move on. to San Nicolas Island? Oh, okay, good question. So why focus so much effort on the malva? So malva is a funny one. It's a shrub on an island where you don't have a lot of shrubs left. So it's an important life form that supports a lot of other things. Also, you wouldn't know it from its rarity, but it's actually really easy to grow. It's kind of it can be almost weedy. It's just that when you have all these introduced animals eating them alive, they're really vulnerable to that because island plants have lost a lot of their defenses to those kinds of animals, to herbivores. And so, basically its rarity is unnatural. And so bringing those back, is just a really important part of reforming habitat, besides the fact that it's, beautiful and unique to the islands. Next. Oh yeah, someone mentioned when the killing's done, and that is also an interesting book with about Anacapa and the rat removal. And T.C. Boyle basically takes real stories and then kind of adds levels of fiction to them, but they're a good read for sure. This one will be obvious, so we'll just go straight to my pet name for San Nicolas is the Lone Island. And you can see lots of pinnipeds on this island as well. Next. This one is the most remote. That's a large part of the name, 61 miles from the mainland. And it's similarly sort of medium-sized and sandy to San Miguel Island. This one's 14,000 acres with a maximum elevation of 907 feet. And you can see in the map on the left that particularly San Nic and San Clemente too have really well-developed coastal terraces that formed as the sea levels changed. Next. As I said, it has a lot in common with San Miguel, and if you can play that video, Caitlin, that is a windsock that's been so tattered by all the wind, and it's not like y'all don't know what wind sounds like, but there you can just see the kind of violence of the wind out there that really shapes the nature of the island. So my video kind of stalled out after just a little bit, but anyway, the wind can be quite strong. Mean precipitation only 8.21 islands, so it's also a pretty dry island. Next. Okay, so these plants are only found on San Nicolas Island. This is the San Nicolas biscuit root, and then the San Nicolas Island buckwheat. Both are found only on San Nicolas Island. Next. And we've talked about some of the other creatures. Let's talk about a really small one. The San Nicolas Island land snail is one of the rarest land mollusks on the islands. Snails, as I'm sure you know, eat plants and actually have a really relatively high levels of endemism on the islands. This great photo was taken by Bill Hoyer, and I had to include snails because he loves snails, and he's the natural resources manager on the islands on San Nic. Next. Now, the native Nicoleño occupied the island for about 7,000 years. So they are part of the Gabrieleño tribe, or Tongva is their name for themselves versus named for the San Gabriel mission. So 80 residential sites are known from San Nicolas Island. Next. And like I said, the Nicoleño are part of the Tongva tribe. So if you look at this map, it's really cool. It shows the different languages, and you see that Chumash is in white, and that the Chumash language is actually quite unique and quite different from all the other surrounding tribes. The Gabrieleño or Tongva are Uto-Aztecan languages, and it actually appears that an earlier culture, more like the Chumash, was replaced by a more inland culture between 1,000 and 6,000 years ago on San Nic. Next. This is some petroglyphs at Whale Cave, which just indicates that the native peoples had a really important relationship to marine animals. Next. So then we have the mission period, which started in 1769 with the first mission in San Diego. Next. And basically the missionaries came, they basically forced Native peoples to work on these missions, to abandon their normal way of life and to take on this new way of life and food and ritual. They also brought diseases like diphtheria and measles, which a lot of the Native people succumbed to, they weren't used to. Next. So the last islander was baptized in 1822 before the missions were secularized in the 1830s. Next. So around that time, there was disease, as I mentioned, there was fighting with those hunting the marine mammals, and there was just resource depletion from all of this going on. And the Nicoleño population declined from a high of about 200 to 300 to as many, no more than 30 in 1835 when the next event happened. There's an example of a massacre of the Nicoleño by members of the Russian American company. Next. So I'm sure you're all aware of the story of the lone woman of San Nicolas Island, or Juana Maria, as we know her. And we now know not just alone, but she had her son with her, and they were left behind in 1835 when missionaries came to take the remaining islanders back to the mainland. Not back to the mainland, but to the mainland. Next. There's George Knight ever again. He's the one who actually found her in the end and brought her to the mainland in 1853. Unfortunately, she died 7 weeks later. It was very hard to communicate with her. She ate all these new foods, rich foods that she wasn't used to, and she died of dysentery, apparently. But she lived in a whalebone hut and she wore cormorant skins. Next. Starting in 1858, Captain Martin Kimberly, same story as on all the islands, period of ranching, sheep, cattle, and horses for 14 years. He had the sheep multiplied really quickly, again, to crazy high numbers for a medium-sized island like this, to up to 15,000. Next. After a series of droughts, the sheep were starving. Look at this image, it's just insane. This is the density that these animals had on these islands. You can see exactly why the woody vegetation was eliminated. The adobe house was half buried. The animals were just digging down to the roots of things like that biscuit root that's found only on San Nic, just to get any kind of nutrients. Next. And similar story, by 1930, the island was less than half vegetated, and a sand spit formed from the erosion, but that didn't stop folks from ranching. Next. Until the Navy took over. They acquired the island in 1933, but they allowed ranching to continue for a while by leasing. And then they took over, they set up an Army Air Surveillance Squadron, they started bombing, it became part of the Naval Air Missile Testing Center. And today it's an interesting mix of radar and telemetry. They interact with Port Hueneme and Point Mugu, conducting exercises and observing them from the mainland. But also the Navy, the military in general, does a lot of conservation, which you'll hear about. But the fact that it's so isolated out there is actually really ideal for conducting these kinds of military operations. Next. One of the major conservation efforts on this island was feral cat eradication. It was a 3-year effort without the use of a toxicant, which is just really pretty incredible given all the native animals on the island. Next. It was a huge collaborative effort. Funders and managers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Montrose, the Navy, Island Conservation did the cat eradication. Institute for Wildlife Studies took care of the foxes. They designed a padded leg hold trap that would protect the foxes. and they worked with the Humane Society to accept the cats and take them to the mainland to live out their life. Next. Just some impressive statistics for the island. 66 cats were removed. 59 of them went to a facility in Ramona. They traveled 168 miles searching for sign and had 27,000 camera trap nights to find them all. It cost about $3 million, which is 100 times the cost of what it would have cost if they had used poison. But what a victory. The 5th largest island to eradicate feral cats at the time and the largest without toxicants. And all these wonderful animals, from the snail and the fox and the mouse that we talked about to the island night lizard that we haven't yet talked about. Lots of happy animals. Next. And a whole lot of restoration going on. So I don't have time to get into it, but lots of plants going in the ground and just trying to get that native biodiversity back to support all these unique critters. Next. Native vegetation equals happy snails because they've evolved with those plants. And Charles Drust studies these snails. He found more mollusks on feral animal-free islands, which is related to just the level of plant cover and diversity. Next. You can take one question if y'all have anything. I'm gonna open up the chat here. For San Miguel, I imagine you could view the pinnipeds by boat. Treacherous waters though, be careful. Any questions? All right, let's move on then, Caitlin. Oh, here's where we're gonna take an intermission. What do y'all think? We have 4 more islands to go. I see a thumbs down. I am worried about timing because of all of our, yeah, okay. All right, I see skip intermission, no need, let's go, let's do it. All right, San Clemente Island. I would like to hear what people's ideas are in the chat. What are the first, thank you everybody for the, I'm glad we seem to be in total agreement. Cactus. Julie, I know you work out there. What else? Choya, yes. Unexploded ordnance, yes. So the military and the cactus are big deals, which is why, Caitlin, I named it the Rugged Individual. So it is a rugged island. It is hot and dry. It is covered a lot by choya, which is a real hazard to humans. Just it kind of reflects the military nature of this island. There's a whole lot of things going on militarily on this island. Next. It is the next biggest, 36,000 acres over. It's 49 miles to the mainland, which is important because this is the 4th largest island. So it makes a big enough target for things to get there from the mainland. But it's also the 2nd most remote, which means that once they get out there, they're pretty isolated. And so they have they're more likely to evolve into their own endemic things. So if you click again, you'll see that San Clemente has the most single island endemic plants, about 15. Oh, San Nicolas, yeah, huge abalone shell mouse. Oh yeah, the marine life is amazing, and the native stories are amazing too. So 15 different single island endemic plants on San Clemente, just all kinds of things from live forevers to bed straw to different lotuses and buckwheats and delphiniums, all kinds of great stuff. Next. Including this one, the San Clemente Island Indian paintbrush, Castanea gricia, which is a neat one because paintbrushes are actually hemiparasites. So you can see the little diagram there that shows how the roots tap into the host plant via these structures called haustoria. And so they get water and mineral nutrients at least from other plants. Next. Here's another unique plant. This is the island ironwood. So now we're on a bigger island that has the ironwood. It's a whole genus endemic to the islands, but it's what's called a relict. So it used to be more widely distributed in the Western US, and it's a paleo endemic. So it means it evolved longer ago, and now it's just restricted to the islands. So next. It likes sort of steep north-facing slopes where it's nice and moist and protected from the sun. And there's two different subspecies, one found on Cruz, Rosa, and Clemente, and then one found only on Catalina. And you can see they have very different leaf shapes, and you might recognize the one on the left from the garden's logo. Next. So this is cool. I like bugs, and ironwood caterpillars only use ironwoods. So obviously ironwood moths, their larval stage is the caterpillar. Those guys are herbivores. They tend to be very specialized and just use one or a few different plants. So these caterpillars are only found on ironwoods, and you can see the one on the left. Yeah, this is all Clemente. Is named for the ironwood. Next. And in general, it's impressive that there's 750 moths and butterflies found on the Channel Islands. Next. And that a fair number of them are endemic, 26 species, and 60% of those to only a single island. Next. This is the San Clemente Island loggerhead shrike, which is rare and unique. And you can see loggerhead shrikes in the photo on the upper right there. You can see an impaled Jerusalem cricket, and that's their MO, is they'll capture these things and then kind of save them for later, let them die on the vine. They like open vegetation, and they eat insects, birds, lizards, and small mammals. So lots of stuff. Next. Turning to more modern human history, in the early 1900s, the government granted short leases to stockmen. So we had William Howland and the San Clemente Wool Company. Same story again, just sheep running amok, getting really abundant. Next. And then the Navy took over in 1934, and they ended the sheep operations, shipped them off. Next. And now San Clemente Island is an integrated air, land, and sea range complex. It's the last ship-to-shore firing range. They do all kinds of things, like I mentioned, missiles and rockets, research, development, and testing, both shore and underwater. You've got Navy SEALs conducting covert operations in the dark of night on the steep cactusy slopes. We've got a simulated embassy after 9/11. Amphibious vehicles around World War II were tested. So they definitely adapt to what's happening in the world at the time. Next. And again, just like with San Nic, the island's remoteness and complete Navy ownership make it really ideal for this kind of work. Next. I want to point to another important environmental law, the Endangered Species Act of 1973, which has led to really major conservation efforts, especially on our military bases. So some of the most impressive conservation work is happening on our military bases, in large part due to this act. Next. Several of San Clemente's introduced animals were removed by 1992. You'll see that feral cats and black rats are still present, very hard to remove, especially on an island as large as this one, much harder than it was on Anacapa or San Nicolas. Next. But as a result of this feral animal removal, by 2006, 14 of 28 sensitive plant taxa had increased. So all it took for these was just to remove that pressure, that constant grazing and browsing pressure. Things like the San Clemente Island Brodea and bedstraw and evening primrose, these unique species, subspecies found nowhere else. Next. The San Clemente Indian paintbrush is one of those that benefited. It rebounded from just a few hundred individuals to tens of thousands, and it was downlisted from federally endangered to federally threatened. It's the one with the yellow flowers in this picture. Next. And the San Clemente loggerhead shrike population had been down to just 14 in 1998. Next. And what we had was the San Diego Zoo starting a program with artificial incubation and hand rearing that then was joined by the Institute for Wildlife Studies that added on the island video monitoring as well as research and recovery and really experimenting with ways to get this population back and understand what its threats are. Next. And through all of their efforts, the number of breeding shrikes in the wild has skyrocketed since they released the birds they were captive breeding at the zoo. So you can see in 2009, just really great numbers when you consider how low the number was. Next. And just important to note that when you're dealing with rare species, sometimes what benefits one is bad for another. So in this case, the loggerhead shrike was federally endangered. The island fox was not listed, but because it's a predator of the shrike, it was being euthanized. It was having shock collars put on it to protect the shrike. But what Romer and Wayne pointed out is that it's important to kind of back up and see the forest, and consider the ecological role of each of these. And the fact is that they both just needed habitat. The loggerhead shrike really needed places to perch on to see its prey, and it needed habitat to hide in from the island fox. So if you enhance habitat, you can help both of them. Next. And it's working. Next. So Soil Ecology and Restoration Group is doing a lot of work out there, planting lots of habitat, doing rare plant conservation, and it's just nice that the Navy is working to try to balance bombs with biodiversity. Next. So I just wanted to highlight real quick a project that we have going on at the garden that I'm really excited about. The Navy wanted to know more about the different invertebrates found on the islands. Insects are half the world's biodiversity, but really little known. So the first goal is just to describe the bug diversity, and you might wonder, why would the garden get involved with something like this? Next. Well, for one reason, it takes pollinators insect pollinators to protect our rare plants and get them reproducing. So by studying the flower visitors of these different rare plants, we're able to construct networks that help us understand which creatures use which plants, and we can use that information to try to augment the right pollinators. Also, we're interested in sampling in such a way where we're sort of past the expedition phase where it's all about discovery. Now we're in the conservation and restoration phase where we need to understand how to put these things back together. And we need to collect data in such a way that we can make future comparisons to, when climate changes and we do restoration, so we can understand if we're making a difference. So also learning the plants and the habitats that they're using these are all reasons why the garden had an interest in getting involved. And we have all these partners that you see across the bottom there at museums who are specialists receiving the specimens at the end. Next. So far, and we're still processing these bugs, 2 whole new classes of invertebrates, 6 new orders, and 20 new families for the island. 1 new genus, if you can click Caitlin on the video. This is Nomada. It's in the Apidae, it's in the bee family, but it's basically a parasite of other bees. And so you'll see it's not so hairy. It looks like it's going too slow to tell, but these guys are sleeping on these flowers, and Stephanie was playing with them by doinking them on their butts. And you can see that, they look like wasps, but she's just having fun with them. Next. So far, just a few groups, 3 times the millipedes, 4 times the spiders, and 9 times the centipedes that used to be known for the island. I'm not talking about new species, although we think we're finding a couple of those as well, but it's still early. Next. Here's another video that might be too hard to show you. That's working. So this is a mason bee. And remember that ironwood, that unique ironwood? This guy is collecting plant material from the ironwood leaves to use to form nest compartments for its babies. So that's why it's called a mason bee, is it separates the compartments using this material. And they can be real specialized to the kinds of plants that they use to do that. Next. Okay, we have time for a question or two. Okay, is ironwood robust on San Clemente? So I wouldn't say so. I can't say that I know it inside and out, that island, but I know that it likes those north-facing slopes, those kind of shaded areas, and that the trees and shrubs were really decimated on the island. So I don't think so. But Julie, do you want to weigh in on that? Let's see. How is it decided to what era restoration efforts are geared? That is a really great question, and I'm glad you asked. It used to be that we thought of restoration as restoring to a point in time, and then it felt a little arbitrary what point in time. Basically, it has a lot to do with when we started moving around a lot and introducing a lot of things. But now, with climate change and just having to prioritize, it's really more about getting the train back on the tracks, trying to restore diversity and resiliency to that diversity provides to change in the future. So it's less so to a particular era, although we do look for examples of, similar areas that are in better shape that we can kind of use as a guide. Okay, so Julie says it also doesn't reproduce in the wild. And we think that's in part due to the low genetic diversity in these really isolated patches of ironwoods. Okay, so let's move on. Ooh, I like these answers for San Nic though. Ancient marine terraces, ghostly and majestic. Yeah, San Nic definitely has an old feel. Okay, so Santa Catalina, what do you think of? Let's do the chat. I like this chatting, because otherwise I can't hear any of you. Urban, yep. Bison, tourism, tourists, yep. Exactly. Well, if you click, Caitlin, I call it the resort island, which Botanic Garden, yep. It's all about people on this island for sure. And it's got a really interesting human history. You can see Avalon in the background there of all these nice native plants. Next. And the fact that Catalina is close to one of the largest cities in the US, this whole Los Angeles metropolitan area, is really influenced that. It's a large island with water that's found close to LA. So that totally has influenced what all has happened on this island. Next. You can see we're getting even bigger. We've got 48,000 acres, elevation up to 2,100 feet. You can see from this aerial, much more complex. We've got a few perennial streams now, so more water. I want to point out this isthmus where the land constricts to only a half mile in width, and that will become important later. Next. And because of this more complex topography, the large size, we've got more different kinds of plant communities. And when I worked out there, I mapped them. So we have coastal scrub is the largest component, island chaparral and grassland. Next. But all these less common plant communities as well, coastal dunes, coastal salt marsh, riparian habitat, just, you know, a few drainages having more permanent water, woodland and coastal bluff scrub. Next. So here we have riparian forest with willows and cottonwoods, and this is just super important habitat. As we know, as humans, it's important to hang around water, and the animals do that too. So next. Like the Catalina Island shrew, which is found only on Catalina Island. It weighs only as much as a penny. It has a really kind of quick life cycle. I believe it's done in about a year. And it especially likes riparian habitat. It also likes maritime cactus scrub and chaparral. And this guy is an insectivore. Next. So speaking of riparian habitat, that riparian habitat, for instance, like here, what's shown Bulrush Canyon, would have been really important to providing fiber, food, and medicine to native peoples, like these rushes that were important for basketry, the wild rose that provided food, and talcum powder for babies, and tea, and yerba buena, which helped with stomach upset and fever. Next. So this island has had a long line of owners, and I'm not going to drag you through all of that. But the last Mexican governor, so these three largest islands, instead of going straight to the US, they were actually ceded to someone by the Mexican governor. So on Catalina, that was Thomas Robbins. Next. So I'm just going to jump to probably the most influential landowner on Catalina, and that's William Wrigley Jr. Made his fortune with Wrigley's gum, of course, and he was really important for really further building up the transportation and communication that made it possible for this to be that resort island. So he linked the steamships with the Pacific Electric streetcar line. He set up telegraph and radio telephone, and actually built submarine cables across to the island for communication. Next. So by the 1930s, Catalina was already a popular resort town and a retreat for the rich and famous, including presidents and lots of celebrities. And he built this casino building, which is less about gambling and more just about a place for gathering, like with this ballroom and this amazing theater that I really recommend with all this wonderful Art Deco art. And so just a really sort of romantic place to be. Next. Associated with all these visitors and all this kind of romance and mystique, 14 American bison were brought for a film in 1924, and then they were left on the island, and then they were augmented. They didn't even make it into the movie. It was The Vanishing American, Zane Grey's, and actually Zane Grey has a house on Catalina. Next. And because of all this human history throughout the island, Catalina has more introduced animals than any other channel island. So you'll see new things on this screen here, including Argentine ants, although they're found on more islands. You have bullfrogs, you have starlings, and you even have black buck antelope from Asia. William Wrigley was big on exotic creatures. Next. But a botanist and a ranch manager helped change the island's history. So we have Dr. Robert Thorne, an important botanist who was affiliated with the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, and Doug Probst, who came from Colorado to work on the ranch out there. But then when they got rid of the cattle, he became in charge of the conservation, and he later became the first company president. So together, these two, you can see some journal article titles, really argued for the importance of the diversity and uniqueness of this island and for conserving it. Next. So the Catalina Island Conservancy was founded in 1972. They own 88% of the island, and their mission is recreation, conservation, and education. And the island gets over 1 million visitors a year. Next. Just a quick conservation story. This is the year I started working on Catalina. It's the year 2000, and my first day of work, we had an emergency meeting announcing that the fox had declined by 90%. So normal population around 2,000, and it was down to about 200. And they discovered it was due to canine distemper virus, and they later learned that was introduced from raccoons who were stowing away on boats. Next. So the Conservancy, there were fox recovery efforts on other islands as well, park islands that had already been going on. And the Conservancy acted boldly to start three things. One, an experimental vaccine, because this challenge, the distemper, is new for Catalina. Captive breeding and translocation from, this is where the isthmus comes in. That was kind of a barrier for the distemper. And so the foxes were okay on the far side of the island. And so they actually moved them to the main side to sort of spread them out more. Next. So Catalina benefited from lessons learned on the northern islands, and they had the full Cadillac model of captive breeding with big pens and structural diversity inside them, 2 den boxes, video equipment, and a full-time vet. Next. Today, the population is back to normal levels, and the fox was downlisted in 2016. Across the islands, the island fox is the fastest recovery known for an endangered species. Next. You know what? I am going to skip a couple of things in the interest of time. Caitlin, if you could push forward just a little bit. Suffice it to say that because of the humans, there's some extra challenges on the islands, including dams and roads and fire. Keep going, Caitlin. And one of the things I studied was fire, which is a bad combination with introduced mule deer. Keep going. So just to kind of finish that, goats were removed, pigs were removed, bison are actually being managed on the islands with contraception, but mule deer are still on the island and they're having a strong impact. Next. I think I saw some chat things happening here. Fox wee. Not sure what that means. Anyone have any questions?
Maybe people can start putting in their both their questions and their descriptions for Santa Rosa.
Yeah, let's move on to Santa Rosa.
And if any questions come up, we can circle.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a great question, Tom. Okay, so rattlesnakes have, to my knowledge, been on Catalina a long time. And does tourism make Catalina so different that it can't be conserved as well? Yes, it does. Actually, that human pressure means that you'll never remove the feral cats. You'll never remove the rats. They would just be reintroduced. Argentinians are a lost cause as well. So some of the invasive species that it's possible to remove on the other islands is just not possible on Catalina. On the other hand, with all those visitors, it can be a really great ambassador for all of the islands. With all those people visiting, Catalina can really make a difference by being kind of the gateway to the islands and explaining how special these islands are and how important conservation is. No Torrey pines on the island, although actually they're planted a little bit on Catalina. They're only naturally found, that subspecies, on Santa Rosa.
I think that's a description of Santa Rosa.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Okay, yeah, so Torrey pines and pygmy mammoth. Yeah, totally. Okay, so Santa Rosa, here's the name that I did not give it, and that is Island of the Cowboys. It's been called that by many a folk. So rattlesnakes probably got to Catalina by rafting. And Catalina has more reptiles and amphibians than any of the other islands, which is interesting. Okay, so Santa Rosa is the Island of the Cowboys. Next. Nearly 54,000 acres, peak elevation of 1589, so not as tall as Catalina. And you can probably see from this Google Earth image, it's not quite as rugged either. Next. Mostly sedimentary, a bit of volcanic rock. Next. And here I just wanted to bliss out on a few images. So sedimentary, Lobo Canyon, this amazing, beautiful canyon I recommend. Next. Sandy beaches and turquoise waters. Next. Back dunes at Carrington Point. This is silver bush lupin. You can see the sand. Next. And like I said, more gentle slopes and probably a lot more grassland than there would have been in the past. Next. This is Black Mountain, which is more volcanic, and it supports the majority of the chaparral and woodland on the island today. Next. And these are island oaks, Quercus tomentella, found only on the California Channel Islands, mostly the bigger islands, but also Anacapa, and this is on Black Mountain. Next. And the island scrub jay is not there anymore, but it was, and it's needs oak woodland or oak chaparral or pines, and it uses that strong beak to break open those things. But it's an omnivore, it eats other things as well. This is the only island endemic bird species in North America. It's bigger than the mainland one, it's darker blue than the mainland one, it has a more raspy call. Next. Here's that Torrey pine someone mentioned. It's really rare. It's quite lovely. It's got these long, somewhat grayish green needles. And it's only found in this generally one spot on Santa Rosa Island. There is a different subspecies at Torrey Pines Reserve area in San Diego. Next. Here's, speaking of rare plants, here's another rare plant, the Santa Rosa Island manzanita, and as the name implies, only found on Santa Rosa. And together with Santa Cruz manzanita, Arctostaphylos insularis, they have their own moth. So I mentioned that, caterpillars can be real specialized, and this moth is only found on these manzanitas, which you can see kind of the low growing shrubs in the picture on the left. Next. So Vail and Vickers are the ones who ranched, had the biggest piece of modern human history on the islands, ranched out there for nearly a century. They ran it as a cattle stocker ranch, so basically bringing young cattle from the mainland over for about 18 months so they could gain about 600 pounds. Next. And 4 generations of Vails pretty much ran the show on the island while cowboy life was fading on the mainland. Next. This was the last island in the US to ship cattle to the mainland. Next. And at that time, there were 3 non-native ungulates remaining, feral pigs, mule deer, and kaibab elk. Both of the last 2 had been introduced for hunting to sort of supplement the income and food for those guys. Next. But by this time, between all the cattle and the sheep that came before them and the feral animals, the Santa Rosa Island manzanita was in trouble. You can see all the trampling and breakage, and it was not reproducing, and it was listed as federally endangered. Next. And the destruction of the scrub and the woodland likely caused the extirpation of the island scrub jay, so oaks had similar trouble. Next. Then the park took over, not without resistance, but 1980 they made a deal, and then together they allowed ranching and hunting to continue for another 25 plus years. They removed some of the military era buildings like at Johnson's Lee. Next. They eradicated feral pigs by 1993, and then you can see these photos are all of the same location, transects that are run regularly in the same place. So you can see between 95 and 99, not a ton of change, but then bam, same spot, and now you've got willows and cattails and all kinds of great stuff. In that same canyon, 17 different endemic plants increased by 270% between 94 and 2010. Next. Deer and elk were then removed in 2011. This was pretty controversial. Next. But as a reward, after that, 2013 revealed new plants and a density unheard of. And I got to experience this through the eyes of Catherine McEachern, who had been working out there for a long time, and she was just amazed. Here you have blue dicks, which were an important source of food for the native peoples out there, the corms they could eat and gather and have as a food source all year. Next. So all this damage, not long ago, there were only about 100 Torrey pines left on the island. Next. And then thanks to the animal removal, there are now over 24,000. Next. But some things are harder to recover. This is remnant island oak woodland, and you can see all the erosion, ton of soil has been lost. Next. So much so that there's 3 feet of topsoil gone, and you can see these trees look like they're walking on stilts. Those are their roots. Next. So the park, Catherine McEacher and Ken Neeson, Sarah Cheney, all have been working on a cloud forest restoration project. You can see in the red, that's what they think was the past chaparral footprint, but in the green, that's where chaparral is currently, and the trees only currently in the yellow. So they use different evidence for past footprint to try to define where they could try to restore this cloud forest, which is so called because there's so much fog on Santa Rosa Island, and it's a really important water source in the summer for the plants. Next. So the first thing is just to keep from losing so much soil. So lots and lots of erosion control, 2.5 miles of it. Check dams and silt fences, wattles and rock bags and litter fences, all just meant to sort of stop the water flow and taking the soil with it. Next. Lots of plants, mostly pioneers like perennial bunch grasses, also a lot of shrubs and trees. Next. And then ingenious ways to capture fog water, which just needs kind of a surface to gather on and condense. So they put in these fog panels, they constructed these little fog hats, and together they would, basically be these built-in watering systems for the plants that they put in, as well as choosing plants that are really good at fog capture, like coyote bush. Next. And this work continues, so stay tuned. Okay, I think because we're getting real close on time, I'm just going to move on here, but I'm happy to stay after for questions. And the last island we'll breeze through is Santa Cruz Island. I'm just going to cut to the chase on this one. My husband named this one, John Knapp. He works on Santa Cruz Island for the Nature Conservancy, and he called it the Lazarus Island because of Saint Lazarus, that basically was restored from death after 4 years by Jesus Christ in the Bible. Santa Cruz it's just recovered remarkably since feral animals have been removed. Next. This is the largest of the islands at 61,440 acres. It's got the highest maximum elevation at almost 2,500 feet. You can see it's pretty complex topographically, and you can see a pretty distinct valley in the center. There's a fault along there. Next. You can see it in this image too, and you can also see in this map of the geology that it's got really diverse geology, which really, together with the big size and the water sources, really affects the diversity of the plants and thus the animals on the island. Next. So on the south, and also the geology is kind of different on the north side of the fault from the south side. So on the south side, you've got things like schist, that supports all kinds of cool shrubs like felt leaf ceanothus and tree poppy and manzanita. Next. And then on the north side, you have Santa Cruz Island volcanics that support more trees and coastal bluffs and rare species. Next. Then you have this Monterey formation at the isthmus, and it's more dry and unstable. And this probably looks familiar to you from our landscape around Santa Barbara. Kind of this layered effect with this kind of formation is a source of petroleum. So 38% of this formation surface area is Quaternary era landslides. And it's fewer kinds of plants that like this, but there's a white-haired manzanita that's unique to the island that likes it especially. Next. There's 8 plants found only on Santa Cruz Island, including the bush mallow there in the lower left that we'll highlight later. Next. There's bishop pines, also found on Santa Rosa Island. They tend to like more north-facing slopes where it's cooler and wetter. Back farther ago, when it was even wetter still, there were more different kinds of conifers on the island. Next. We've got southern coastal oak woodland with coast live oak. Next. Oaks have this wonderful complex architecture that really supports a ton of creatures. Next. Like wood fern and Humboldt lily and all kinds of wonderful herbs. Next. And Dudleya, you can see circled in there, there's a live forever nestled in the crook of that oak, and there's a close-up of it. Next. You can see in these images that follow just the different kind of mixed habitats that's created by this different topographic diversity and geologic diversity, including marshland and riparian habitat. Next. Pyroclastic rocks are basically sedimentary, but it's of volcanic origin on the south side here. Next. Chaparral looking west to the China Pines. Next. And all of this wonderful diversity supported not just a ton of residences, but whole villages, and with the highest density on the western tip. Next. An important source of chert, which they used for their weapons, was found on Santa Cruz Island, where the Monterey Formation meets volcanics at El Montañón, which is in red there. Next. So the most important landowner probably is the Santa Cruz Island Company formed, and Justinian Care and his wife developed the island into an old world estate. They had ranch sites throughout the island, including the main ranch, Christie Ranch, and Prisoners Harbor. Next. And they developed it into an old world estate. They had sheep, cattle, chickens, horses, pigs, a winery. Next. They used island materials to build these structures. And here's just a couple of views of the Commodore. Next. And the chapel. Next. And then Edwin Stanton bought 9/10 of the island in 1937. He modernized things. He transitioned to cattle. And then his son, Dr. Cary Stanton, took over. Next. Who arranged the sale of the island to the Nature Conservancy in 1978. So you can see they own the big chunk of the island on the left. And then next, they gave the Isthmus area to the Park Service in the year 2000. Next. One of the biggest threats to the biodiversity that TNC is trying to protect is invasive species. They take over, they reduce biodiversity, and that has effects throughout the web of life. Next. Invasive plants, the problem is that they disperse 1,000 times faster with humans. Next. So nature just can't keep up as far as adapting to these new organisms. Next. So TNC removed their feral pigs using a helicopter, which was super efficient. Oh, thank you, Bob. They did it in only 15 months with the help of the helicopter and these really skilled guys from New Zealand. They had planned to do it for 6 years. So they got done so fast, next, that they got to use the time to map invasive plants and to hatch a plan to eradicate the ones that could be eradicated and control others. So they were able to map 55 different species in 41 days across the whole island. And those blue lines are all the tracks from the helicopter. Next. They use the helicopters to shuttle weed techs too, and they can get them to some really remote spots. Next. Last thing I wanted to say, TNC also has a really forward-looking rare plant program. They get out really regularly to look for these plants that haven't been seen in a long time. Next. And there's all kinds of great work going on, collaborative work to recover the island barberry. Next. The bedstraw that's been spreading since feral animal removal. It's the one that's kind of reddish. And that arrow indicates that they're able to take these amazing photographs, wildlands conservation science, from the helicopter and survey and map where it's spread. Next. And the Santa Cruz Island bush mallow is well on its way to recovery, with new populations starting and lots of research and recovery efforts. Next. Okay, so I just wanted to make a few closing points. Sorry for taking a little longer here. Next. Challenges of COVID era Zoom calls. I just wanted to give a few takeaways. I think you saw, I hope you saw that the islands are unique. They're beautiful, they're really special. Next. Centuries of overgrazing and introduced species have had major impacts though, but major conservation achievements have been made. You've seen invasive species removal, native species recovery, and habitat restoration, all of which have made a huge difference. There's still plenty more to do. And I think you saw with all the logos on yes, the symposium has been postponed. It was supposed to be this November, but we'll have to have it next year. So there's plenty more conservation work to do, and that's much better when we can all do it together and work as an archipelago. Next. So this is my final closing thought to all of you, that the islands are places of inspiration and of hope, and they can remind us what's possible if we work together. And I will stick around for any questions. Sorry again for going over. Let's see, do you recommend Corinne Laverty's new book? I did read it, I enjoyed it. I think that just going over the exploration that the Los Angeles County Museum, went to all the islands and all the things that they experienced and found, it was fun to read about that. Thank you guys. Let's see. Oh, cool. Is wildfire a danger? It is. There's been several fires in the last couple of years on the island. I mean, wildfire is it's a natural process. It's a natural disturbance. It can actually, be rejuvenating for systems. But if they haven't recovered enough from all the impacts, then it can be too soon to have those. So it's kind of a double-edged sword a little bit.
So we have prepared a list of books, natural history, human history, and some photography that Denise recommended, and I'll be sending that out to all the registrants in probably on Monday. So wait a little while.
And because of COVID, I won't be teaching the full course this fall, but I'll try to do it when we are able to be in person again. It's so much more fun when we can all be in person, and then we can go do a field trip to one of the islands. Thank you all for hanging in and for being here today.
Yeah, and Denise, if you want to turn your video on, we can try that and see how it goes.
Oh yeah, I forgot I wasn't on anymore.
Yeah.
Where am I? Let's see.
Should be on the bottom left.
Oh, yep.
And I welcome others to turn their video back.
Oh, cool, you're still there. It looked like you had all gone away. Oh, hi.
Yeah, I recommended that people turn their video off so that we could just have a lower bandwidth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Oh, it's good to see your faces. Thank you.
And yes, we are recording this, so I'll send that out as well, so everyone has the recording. In fact, I'll probably pause it. Well, I guess I want to capture questions. Are there any other questions for Denise? Maybe I think we should still keep it in the chat box.
Yeah, so someone asked a little bit more about the classes. Last time it was a series of 9 classes. So I had an intro lecture. They go for about an hour and a half. And then I covered each of the islands. So that was just like this majorly compressed little just surface level. And so I talk for an hour and a half about each of those islands, going into all those, their whole story. So it's a lot of fun, a lot of information. Let's see.
Maybe, do we want to try unmuting people? And
oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay, I'm gonna unmute everyone now, so you'll be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah. What? You're unmuted.
You're unmuted, so we can hear you if you
There you are.
So we have a couple new questions here. Let's see. Challenges with COVID, but is there any need for volunteers? Yes, when when we're more safe from COVID, Channel Islands Restoration gets people out to volunteer on the islands all the time. Also, straight through the Park Service. The garden we brought out, our field trip for this class, we volunteered while we were out on Santa Rosa Island. So lots of opportunities to volunteer, so many things that can be done. You can also volunteer here at the garden with island plants. Not as fun as going out to the islands, but that's another way to do it. Any idea when the national park will be finishing repairs to access Santa Barbara? I don't know for sure. It would be a guess at this point.
I moved.
And then Caitlin, this is a question for you. Will we get notification about the class?
It likely would not run until next, late summer, fall. So yes, we would advertise it in the normal ways that we are advertising classes right now, which is through our Garden Gazette, which goes out twice a month, and the Ironwood, which is in print and goes out to members, to your households. And then through social media and a lot of word of mouth, I think, is how our news.
And the website.
Yes, and everything's posted to the website.
Oh, so yeah, can't we do remote? Technically, I think we showed that we could do it. It's just not nearly as gratifying to do it via Zoom. So I'd really rather do it in person. But just that you're asking implies that you'd be interested. So that's good to know. We can think about it. Maybe we should do it. Yeah, poll people. Uncertain times. Okay, so Chuck says the entire national park is technically open, but research is extremely limited and must be cleared through us in the park. Yeah, it's all really complicated right now. Cool. All right, well, I guess that's it then for us. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Yeah.
It's great to see your faces. That was the best part for me.
Can we all unmute ourselves
watched.
and give Denise a round of applause?
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Very well done.
Thank you, guys.
Beautifully done.
The islands are cool. They're a wonderful subject. You can't do them wrong.
Mhm.
So still then, if you look at your window, what do you see on the window? Do you see any?
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining, and I'll be following up on Monday with additional books to look into and the recording.
Thank you, Caitlin.
I'll be asking you for a survey.
Thanks,
All right.
Kate. Good to see you all.
Have a good evening. Bye.